all for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Simon, for organizing this. It was kind of a last-minute thing. So I very much appreciate this is part of a tour that I'm on that was scheduled a long time ago in Europe. And I usually, because of my airline choices, I usually come by London. So I was going to recover from jet lag here anyway, so I figured might as well give a talk. The best way to recover from jet lag is to go in front of a group of people and talk, right? So I figured I'd do that. And then the question was, what should we talk about? And I've been getting a lot of flack everywhere for my views on Donald Trump and this last election. So we figured, why not do it live instead of just getting harassed through Twitter and Facebook? You can do it live. And somebody asked me if there will be a Q&A. Yes, there will. So you'll have your opportunities to both ask questions and harass me a little bit. I want to give some context because I think it's very easy to get caught up in the minutia of Donald Trump said this, Hillary Clinton said that, this one stands for this one stands for that, and you can kind of make laundry lists and check off what do I like about each candidate and add up the check marks and say, okay, I'm going to vote for this one because there's more check marks. I don't think that's how you approach anything in life, but because issues are not flat, they're not all equally important. And I certainly don't think you do that based on politics. So I want to give some context to what I think this election is about, to maybe what is going on kind of more broadly in the Western world, because I don't think this is just about the election in the United States, although the United States has very, very important significance to everything going on in the Western world, and I'll talk about that. But it certainly is broader than that. So I want to do some history and some fundamental ideas and then get to this election, but not start with the election, right? Because I think it's a consequence of a lot of things happening in the world that we got to where we are today. Now, as Simon said, this is a very diverse group. We have quite a few objectivists in the room who probably know everything I'm going to say and have heard me probably say it a few times in the past. And we've got people who've never heard of me or Ayn Rand or anything. So and people I think in between as well. So I'm going to pitch somewhere in that spectrum. Hopefully nobody falls asleep from boredom. I want to start with really talking about what makes America special. What is America and why America is, in my view, exceptional? What is American exceptionalism? A term thrown around, bandied around a lot during this election and really for decades, but almost never defined, or at least never defined properly. So what is America, and why is the founding of America unique and special? And I think places the United States and what happens there at a central place in Western civilization, in the context of Western civilization. The United States is the culmination of a set of ideas. And that's what really makes it unique. America was founded on ideas, on moral, philosophical ideas. And what were those ideas? Now, those ideas didn't originate in America. Those ideas actually originated up in Scotland and a little bit in France and maybe some here in London for the Brits in the room. But those ideas were the ideas of the Enlightenment. The ideas that I think have made Western civilization Western civilization. And when I use the term Western, just so we're clear again, because we have a wide... when I talk about Western, I'm not talking about the geography, right? I'm talking about the set of ideas that are Western civilization. In many respects, Western civilization right now is doing better in Asia than it is in the West. So Western civilization set of ideas, not a geography, certainly not a skin color, a race, an ethnic group, or anything like that, which is I'm going to come back to later on. What were the ideas? What is it that the Enlightenment stands for? And I'm not going to do a whole history lesson in Enlightenment. That would take much longer than what we have. But I boil it down to two fundamental ideas. Two fundamental ideas that animated the creation of the United States of America, and I think have animated all the positive trends in the civilized world since then. And those two ideas are the first First is the efficacy of reason. Reason is our basic means of knowledge. Reason is how we learn about the world. And in that sense, the first Enlightenment thinker, influential thinker, is Newton, right? More than Locke. Because it's Newton who teaches us that we can explain the physical world by use of science, by use of reason. That we don't need mystical revelation. We don't need to read ancient books to discover truth. We can use our senses and our minds to discover that truth. And really, the age of reason is the age of science. And they go very much hand in hand, historically and ideologically. This is a great boom in the sciences and the discovery of the extent to which we as human beings can understand the world around us without philosopher kings explaining it to us, or revelation somehow communing with another dimension in order to know what the truth is. And really, if you know a little bit about the history of philosophy, this is the victory of Aristotle over Plato. Plato is the one who says you need, the truth is up there somewhere and only certain people have access to it. And we are all in a cave and all we see are shadows and we're pathetic and we need to be told what to do. Versus Aristotle says you have a mind, you have eyes, you have senses, you can discover the truth. So reason is efficacious. And what happens when ordinary people start studying math and start studying physics and they get it, and we now get why things do behave the way they do, is they go, well, if I have this amazing tool, if I have a mind, if I can think for myself and discover truths about the world for myself, then, wait a minute, I don't need to be told how to live my life and who to trade with and where to buy my goods and everything about my life I should be able to discover. Why is it that in politics I've given up authority when it comes to explaining the natural world? Why in politics do I still have a king or a tribal council or whatever it is that rules over me? I can think for myself. I can take care of myself. I can live my own life. And this is the age in which people rebel against authority. They rebel against authority of the church when it comes to scientific matters and even when it comes to moral matters. And they rebel against the authority of kings and autocrats to dictate how you should live your life. It is an era where individuals recognize that their life is their own for the first time really in human history, or at least since the Greeks. And I boil that idea that your life is your own, that your life does not belong to the state, that your life does not belong to the collective, that your life does not belong to the group, to the tribe, to whatever. That concept is the concept of individualism in a simplistic way, but that's basically individualism. So you've got reason and individualism. These are the two ideas that come up through the Enlightenment and manifest themselves for the first time in a political entity in the creation of the United States of America. Now, very inconsistent. The founders are not consistent in their application of these ideas. They are mixed. They make massive errors, is too nice of a term to talk about slavery, right? Slavery is not an error, it's a massive evasion. And yet, those ideas declared in the Declaration of Independence, that declare that all men are equal in rights, and that all men have right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are revolutionary ideas, moral ideas. They are declaring that all men have the capacity, the ability, the reason to think so that they can make their lives their own, they can live their lives, they can choose their own values, they can choose the values necessary for their own survival. That their lives belong to the individual, not to the state, not to the collective, not to the government, not to groups. So here's a government, here's a country founded on the idea of individualism and on the idea of reason. And the rest of Europe, or the rest of the West at the time, kind of follows that. Nobody adopts it the way America did, but they take elements of it, and indeed, again, the elements were all here already in the Scottish and the French Enlightenment. But the explosion of the Industrial Revolution and of capitalism and of what happens in the 19th and 20th century, or at least until the World Wars, is really a reflection of those two ideas: individualism and reason. Capitalism is the political manifestation of that. It's a political system in which people are left free. Because what is the enemy of reason and of the individual? What is the enemy of your own mind and your own life? What stops you from thinking and ultimately can stop you from valuing and pursuing your values? There's only one thing, and that is force, that is coercion, that is authority backed by a gun. And what the Enlightenment is and what the United States of America represents is the shrugging off of authority. We don't need authority over our lives. Our lives are ours to live. We make mistakes, we'll fix them. We'll figure it out. None of your business. You do not have a right to pull a gun on me, to force me to do what you think is right. I have a mind. Respect that. So, this is a country based on the idea of no authority. Individuals can think for themselves. Individuals can reason. And therefore individuals should be left alone to live their lives as they see fit. And as I said, the West kind of followed in those steps, and the result was the greatest wealth creation in human history. It's even not fair to call it that, right? Because it's so much wealth was created that it's, we don't have a whiteboard here. But most of you probably seen this graph. If you look at wealth per capita, income per capita from 10,000 years ago, it's basically flat, right? It goes flat and little ups and downs, Greece or Rome or something, and then Dark Ages or something, and it goes like this. And then it just goes like that, 300 times within 200 years. That's what these ideas, these simple ideas, simple, complicated ideas, reason and individualism produce. A mass expansion for the first time in human history of wealth, of prosperity, of freedom. At the end of the day, the emancipation of women, the eradication of slavery, all consequence of this trend. They all happen right in the middle of this capitalist era. And it is capitalism, it's this idea of the sanctity of the individual, which results in the elimination of so many of the evils that human race has lived with from the beginning of time. So that is what America represents in my view, and I think in Ayn Rand's view. This is the gold standard, if you will. This is what we're shooting for. This is the ideal. A country that respects individual reason, a country that leaves individuals alone to live free and pursue their own lives. A government that separates itself from the activities, from all of our activities, unless we engage in violence, unless we engage in coercion, unless we engage in fraud. Government stays out of our lives. The only job of government, based on our founders and based on these principles of the Enlightenment, was to protect the individual rights, to protect our right to life, liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness. And let me just be clear what I mean by rights, because rights is a term that has been so distorted and perverted over the last 100 years, together with so many other concepts. Rights don't mean freedom of action. When you have a right to life, it means that you have a right to pursue the values that are necessary for your own survival and thriving. It's not a right to stuff. It's not a right to other people's talent or product or money. You can't have a right to food. You can't have a right to education. You cannot, ooh, this is England, I have to be careful. You cannot have a right to health care.
Television?
What's that?
Television.
Well, healthcare. Yeah, once you say healthcare in England, you're done, right? That's a shocker. Yeah, I mean, this is the country in which you can criticize God, you can criticize the Queen, you can criticize anybody, and everybody goes, yeah, okay. But you criticize the NHS, and you get a riot. That's the true religion of English. So you have a right to pursue action. You have a right to act, to pursue values. You don't have a right to stuff. You don't have a right to things. You cannot have a right to people. You can't have a right to other people's time. So the only constraint, if you will, it's not really a constraint once you get into the ethics, but the only constraint is you cannot violate somebody else's rights in the pursuit of your values. And the only way to violate somebody else's rights is by use of force or fraud, which is force, which is another form of force. So the only job of government is to extract force from society, prevent us from beating each other up, catch the crooks and the criminals and the murderers and the rapists, put them in jail, prevent terrorism, prevent invasion, protect us from invaders, destroy our enemies, and leave us alone. That's the role of government. Okay, now, obviously this vision of America never was fully realized. From the beginning, they didn't live up to it. But it came close, right, through the 19th century and into the very early 20th century in the United States and to some extent in some European countries. But over the last 100 years, it has been under constant, non-stop attack, both philosophically, morally, politically, from every quarter. This vision of a free society has been chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. And really, what's being chipped away primarily are these two ideas. Reason. Well, Kant tells us that reason doesn't really tell us about real reality, just the reality that we kind of make up as we go along. Now, I know the philosopher here will say that's not exactly what Kant said. No, but it's close enough. Your senses distort what you actually see because they're senses. I mean, it's bizarre stuff when you really get into it. Philosopher after philosopher tells us, doubt your reason, doubt your senses. You don't know that there's actually a car outside there. There's a good probability there is, but you can't be certain. Just because your eyes tell you and you can hear it, that's not enough. It is for me. It's why I'm careful when I cross the street. And it is actually for most people, almost everybody, even the philosopher, when they actually live their lives. But when they philosophize, it's not. So skepticism. And I'd say in the United States, over the last 40, 50 years, there's also been a growth in the idea that truth, kind of a reversion to pre-Enlightenment time. Well, maybe truth doesn't come from science. Maybe truth comes from mystical revelation and from ancient books after all. And there's been a real revival of religion in the United States over this period. It's not always evident, but it's there. So the idea of reason has been questioned by philosophers, and it's been questioned by theologians or religious people, and has had almost no defenders. It's had almost no defenders. Even the best libertarians, from Hayek to Friedman, are skeptics when it comes to reason. Skeptics when it comes to reason. They're not willing to defend reason. Hayek's idea is central planning. In a sense, he implies that central planning would be wonderful if we had the full capacity of reason and we could reason all of the issues through, but we can't, so therefore we need models. Well, that's just not wrong. Now, again, a caricature of Hayek's position, but not completely. So, other than Ayn Rand, there have been almost no philosophically defenders of the idea of reason, of the human mind and its capacity to know reality, and to understand reality, and to guide one's choices in reality. And once you start chipping away at our reasoning capacity, at the ability of the individual to know the truth about the world around him, then very soon, right behind those who doubt reason, come the collectivists. Come the people who said, well, you know, since you can't reason, since you can't know the truth, maybe if we all get together, we can know more. Or maybe if you appoint this person as our philosopher king, maybe he'll tell us what to do and how to do it. We saw this in mid-century in Europe, certainly with Nazism and communism. These are two movements that rejected reason, right? Revelation from the spirit of the Aryan race. I know, how do we know what the Aryan race wants and needs? Well, we need to elect a philosopher king, a Führer who can commune through revelation with the group and tell us exactly what the group needs. Communism is exactly the same thing, right? It's just replace Aryan race with the proletarian. We want to do what's good for the proletarian. Well, how do we know what's good for the proletarian? Well, Lenin will tell us. And how does Lenin know? Well, he has special powers at the end of the day. Right? Everybody claims communism is atheistic. Really? It's just has replaced God with a different mystical entity. It's called the spirit of proletarians. Right? It's the same anti-reason mentality. It's the same type of mystical revelation as a source of knowledge that religion provided before communism. Communism is just another form of religion, as is Nazism and most forms of fascism. So, reason has come under attack as a consequence. Individualism has come under attack. And I'd say in the last part of the 20th century, early part of the 21st century, it's not that people have had something really to offer as an alternative. More and more, the ideology of the West has become attack. We don't believe in reason. What do we believe in? Anything goes. We don't care. We just don't believe in reason. We don't believe in individual. What do we believe in? Well, who cares? Pick your choice, right? Every one of you can form your own little collective, your own little group, call yourself whatever you want. You can self-identify with the group based on your feelings, not based on since reason is impotent anyway, you might as well just go by feelings. And what you've seen, particularly, and I don't know, I suspect this is the same in Europe, but certainly in the United States, what you're seeing is a complete deterioration in academia or complete negation in academia of the ideas of individualism and the ideas of reason. And what's replaced them again, whether it's identity politics, just find your identity, right? It could be color of your skin. It could be your sexual orientation. It could be, which now is divided into 170 different categories, I hear, right? It could be, whatever, right? It's all based on emotion, so whatever you feel like today, that's what your group identity might be. A complete rejection of the idea of an individual as standing for something, as owning their own life, as responsible morally for their own happiness and success. What's happiness? Who can tell? It's all subjective anyway. And why be happy when there are so many miserable people in the world? Isn't it your moral responsibility to help them? So how dare you be happy? And in academia, and this is primarily, this brings us more into modern politics, what you're seeing is an intellectual elite which has become detached completely from the founding principles of the United States of America and the principles that made the West great. So an elite, primarily an intellectual elite, a cultural elite, a university elite, that has no clue when you say individualism and reason what you're even talking about. Because they've never grasped those ideas, they've never contemplated those ideas. They've clearly rejected them.
30 minutes including Q&A.
What's that?
30 minutes including the Q&A.
Oh, we're that tight to the time thing?
Well,
Wow, okay. Well, since we want a Q&A, I'll speed it up here. And yet, the American people, or many people in America, and I think many people in Britain and many people in Europe, still have, Ayn Rand called this a sense of life, a subconscious, pro-individualistic, pro-freedom, pro-even reason, although it's never articulated in those terms, kind of sense about the world. They know that these people up here, this intellectual elite is full of crap. They can't explain it, they can't argue against it, but they know there's something very wrong. But they have, this group that knows something is wrong, has no intellectual voice, has no intellectual leaders, has no way to articulate the case. So their case becomes an emotional case. It becomes a case of how they feel versus how other people feel. It's not an intellectual battle. And everybody, whether we like it or not, everybody is shaped by the intellectuals who dominate the culture. So even the people, let's say the common people in America, call them in a simplistic way, who feel individualistic, right, are influenced by this, by the collectivism, by the collectivistic ideas around them. So I think what we've seen in this election, maybe more than we have in the past, although I think it's been going on for a long time and just crystallized in this election, is that if we have group like collective identities, if we're little collectives, then I want to form my own collective to protect the things that I cherish. Individualism. It's kind of funny how we're going to form a collective. You know, but this is what happens when you don't have intellectual consistency. This is what happens when you're not intellectual, but it's all about emotion. We want to stand for America. What does America mean? We don't know, but it's not what's going on today. It's not what Obama represents. It's not what Hillary represents, because they're part of this elite. We want something different. And make America great again, right? What does it mean? Nothing. I mean, it could mean something. It could mean something beautiful. Make America great again. It needs to be made great again. But when you actually articulate, you list the things that none of them are going to make America great again, that Donald Trump is going to do. But again, it's that emotional response that people are responding to. So people are looking for something to replace this corrupt, anti-American intellectual agenda. And what I fear is, and what I think has happened, is that we have gone such a long way from those original ideas and principles. We have such a small voice that is defending those ideas and principles, that people today are willing to accept pretty much anything that stands up against this intellectual elite. All it has to do, all he has to do in the case of Donald Trump or some future president, all they have to do is say the right things against the elites and pander to something American. And they're going to get this vote. And they're going to get this support. And of course, this leaves America and the West generally open to, a shift from kind of the left's craziness to a different type of craziness, a more authoritarian craziness that's pro-American craziness. In verbiage, right? Make America great again. Let's do all the things the left was going to do anyway, which is basically Donald Trump's political agenda, with a few exceptions. But we'll call it in the name of America, and we'll sprinkle into it a few things like bring the jobs back, right, to America, not back anyway, just back to America. Let's close the borders so we stay American. Right? Again, a superficial reading of what America means. America is not a group of people, specific people. It's an idea. And in a sense, anybody who's willing to embrace that idea and come into the country becomes an American. America, whether they like it or not, is a land of immigrants. When I say that in front of groups now of Republicans, I get booed. Literally booed. And yelled at, right? But it is. That's the fact. Spoken by an immigrant to America. But I'm a legal one. They emphasize, they tell me, I like to tell them back, if I hadn't been able to come into America legally, I would have done it illegally. And I am not ashamed of that, and would not be embarrassed to say that. Just like sometimes I speed. I'm an illegal driver. I mean, so what? There's stupid laws on the books, sometimes you violate them. So let me just say something about Trump's unique, I think, approach to this election. And this again is what so that's kind of the context. Trump, I'm very anti-Trump, if you can't tell. Not that I was pro-Clinton, I was very anti-Clinton too, but I was very anti-Trump. And the reason is I observed a certain pattern in the way he ran this campaign. And it's not that I think Trump's going to be an awful president. I think he's going to be about as bad as every other president. And he's maybe a little bit better than some and a lot worse than others. But it's not what he's going to be as a president. But it's the nature of his campaign, which in my view is really, really scary and needs to be thought about. And we need to be careful not to keep going along this path. Because what led to Donald Trump's success? He started out by scaring us. And that's always what an authoritarian does. The world is going to end. Now, again, there has to be a basis of truth to that scaring. And there is. These crazy leftists at universities and everywhere who care more about, I don't know, transgender bathrooms than they do about whether people have jobs or not. And most Americans don't care about transgender bathrooms. The New York Times, there was some statistic about the New York Times during a certain period of time had more stories about the issue of transgender bathrooms than they did about jobs or something like that, right? Now, whatever you think about transgender issues, and for certain individuals they're certainly important, there was a disproportionality, and this is what for most people was like, whoa, you know, these people are detached. So the world is coming to an end, things are really bad, here's some examples, and people go, yeah, those examples, but then you lump in some things that are not real examples, like murders going through the roof, like crime in America is exploding. It is so violent to be in America. Now, if you look at the statistics, it's one of the least violent periods in American history, at least since 1992. Violent crime in all categories, from burglaries to rapes to murders, have gone like this. Dramatic decline, slight increase last year, primarily in places like the city of Chicago, but certainly not a trend. So we live, and globally, and this has to do with Islam, which I know a lot of you are also concerned about, but globally, we live in the most peaceful period in human history. Fewer people die violent deaths today than ever in all of human history, in spite of ISIS. You know, count all their beheadings and all their monstrosities they commit. It's still relatively peaceful. Your chance of dying from violence right now is probably at the lowest point in all of human history. But we're all petrified. And we're told to be even more petrified. We're not scared enough. That's our problem. So you start by scaring people, and then you tell them, it's not your fault. All these problems are not your fault. You didn't do it. You didn't create this world that is so terrifying. Oh, and by the way, I forgot the thing you should be most terrified of is, of course, immigrants, particularly illegal immigrants. You know, they're flooding across the border. Again, statistics. Since 2007, as far as I can tell, nobody has really good statistics on this, but as far as I can tell, the best statistics indicate that since 2007, the number of illegal immigrants in the United States has gone down, which makes sense. Most illegal immigrants that came into the United States during the 2000s worked in the construction industry. The 2008 financial crisis destroyed their jobs. They went back to Mexico. There were more jobs there than there were in the U.S. So if you look, illegal immigrants peaked at about 12 point something million, and have declined to about 11. But Ann Coulter wrote in her book that there are at least 30 million illegal immigrants in the United States, and now that is quoted as if it's fact. Now, I'm not going to get into all the intricacies of where she gets that number, but the best you can say if you want to believe that there are a lot of illegal immigrants is we don't know. But the best studies show that the number's around 11 million and flat for the last 10 years. But they're streaming across the border. Many of them are Muslims geared to kill you. And the others are Mexicans who want to kill you too. Because the violence among illegal immigrants is through the roof. Again, no statistics, no data, lots of anecdotes. Anecdotes are very powerful. Stories. Again, emotion, not reason. Reason is data. Reason is facts. Emotion is stories. Horrible stories. All true. Didn't make the stories up, but they're anecdotes. They're anecdotes. They're not facts. So, a guidebook to authoritarianists winning elections. 1, scare the bejesus out of the population. 2, and use some truth, like the economy's not growing, jobs are hard to find, a lot of the middle class sees somewhat stagnation. But again, that's not even true, right? I'm sorry, but all this, and you should read my book, Equal is Unfair, because there's a whole chapter on this. All this middle class stagnation stuff, right? This is a young group, so you guys weren't here in the 70s. Some of you swore, right? The 70s sucked. They were weird, particularly in London. London was horrible in the 70s. New York was horrible in the 70s. We didn't have iPhones. We had big tube TVs. The place was filthy. London was filthy. New York was filthy. People, when you walked into a store in London, they would treat you like shit. I mean, they would say, what do you want? Okay. There was no concept of customer service. Margaret Thatcher had to, capitalism had to teach them that after Margaret Thatcher, literally. But there's this nostalgia to some past in which the middle class was, I don't know. I was just at Best Buy, is a big electronics store in the United States, and before Thanksgiving, I walked in there, and there were just piles and piles of how, what do you do now? And I think what you're seeing is that Donald Trump is basically reverting to, on most things, there are a few things where he's maybe a little bit more radical, but he's basically going to be mainstream. He's going to be a mainstream Republican. His Secretary of Treasury is like from a long line of Goldman Sachs secretaries of the Treasury, and maybe that's the best place you can find a Secretary of Treasury, right? He's going to replace Obamacare, but he's already promised to include pre-existing conditions in future policies, which destroys insurance. Now, they might do some good things. I'm quite open to the idea that a president, what's his name, Trump, is going to be a lot less dangerous in a sense than a candidate Trump, because he'll be very conventional. He'll do what Republicans always do. What do Republicans always do? You can always count on them when they get elected president. The one thing they always do: cut taxes. Cut taxes. We'll get a cut tax. And of course, if there's another Republican elected in 8 years following him, he'll raise taxes because the deficit will have exploded. And just like George Bush had to raise taxes after what's his name?
Ronald Reagan.
Reagan, and Clinton raised taxes after Bush, and then Bush cut taxes, and then Obama raised them. That's not what matters. What matters is spending. He not going to do anything about spending. So, we're short on time. I could go on for another couple of hours, but I'll end it there. What I think, I'll end on this point. I mean, I think it's really, really crucial for those who believe in liberty to be super critical of Trump. It's obvious that we don't like Hillary, and that we don't like Obama, and that we don't like the left. That's obvious. Everybody knows that. We don't have to differentiate ourselves from them. I mean, we still need to criticize them. And we do, and we should, and we continuously. But Trump, there's this notion that we and him are somehow in the same big tent. That there's some commonality. That when he, talks Kerry into staying in the United States, that's capitalism. He's doing it in the name of capitalism. It's really, really important that we separate ourselves from that. Now, if a Democrat had done exactly the same thing, nobody would have accused him of doing it in the name of capitalism, right? We need to really watch this guy and make sure that he is not confused, or that the people out there are not confused. And I think it's an opportunity to differentiate ourselves from right and left. And I've come to despise the whole spectrum. I don't like right-left, because to me they're all the same. They're all collectivists, and they're all anti-reason. So the spectrum for me is collectivism and individualism. That's the spectrum in politics. I'm way out here on the individualist side, right? And that's kind of, we should be pointing out every time our policy is collectivistic, every time the right and the left are really the same, right? Every time their policies are merging, We need to be clear to differentiate ourselves. We need to criticize them, and we need to stake out a pro-reason, pro-individualistic, real Western civilization, real American kind of flag. Because that's the only hope. The only hope is really to be radical and to be different and to be clear on what the founding principles really mean. Thank you.
Right, Brandon, could you do a head count and shout out the number, please? So that we can inform people who might be watching nearby to come in.
Do we want to start with questions? Questions?
Yes. First question, what Brandon
Go ahead.
has.
It's actually nothing to do with Trump, it's to do with the ARI.
Sure.
I work in, basically work in psychology, I work in a rehab. Are you producing any books on volition and free will at the moment? Because I find that incredibly useful in my work, and obviously it's underlying a lot of this stuff. But
Yeah, I mean, it is really underlying a lot of this stuff, because if you think about what collectivism relies on, or what the anti-reason relies on, and what seems to be now an emerging pattern is that more and more they're pitching a deterministic view of the world, and a deterministic, that is, you don't have free will, you are determined by your race, or by your class, or by your circumstances, or by your parents, or by your genes, which is the most popular these days, and which is incredibly damaging. It's a new form of the anti-reason argument, and it's a very powerful form, and you get very, very sophisticated, or people like Sam Harris, who I have a huge amount of respect for on most things, and then on free will, he's completely bonkers. I mean, he's completely wrong, and it's a huge. So, are there any books? No, unfortunately, they're not. We just had a conference for students in Atlanta, and the whole conference was dedicated to free will. And what we did was we took political issues. I did a talk on immigration and free will, how free will is related to the whole immigration debate. But we took a bunch of these topics and then discussed them. But we also did some philosophy, and we did some psychology. Now, a lot of those videos will be coming out in the next few months. So, check out the Iron Institute YouTube channel where those videos will be coming out. We agree on its importance. I need to encourage the right person to write the right book on it. And I think it'd be good to have a psychology book and a philosophy book, because I think both are important aspects of the same issue.
What was the head count?
49.
49. So
49.
if you're watching on the live stream in Pret a Manger or Starbucks or something, there is space for you. You can come in and stand by the bar. Come on.
Are there people there?
I have no idea.
Oh.
There was about somewhere between 6 and 10 people on the live stream, so I don't know where those guys are.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
I think during Alcon it was Gina Borland that did some speech on altruism
Yes.
and CBT, which ties with psychology.
Yeah, and she was at this conference, and she did some stuff on psychology and free will. So
It's
definitely
already
work being
available
done.
online.
What's that?
It's already available.
It's already available online.
Yeah. in the
So
idea.
look it up in the Ayn Rand Institute YouTube channel. Yeah.
Well, there's a discussion between among people who are in believe in capitalism and liberty, and I would like to know where do you stand on that? Do you think that there is any way to bring change politically, or should we abandon politics completely, or maybe you're standing somewhere between?
Well, I mean, I think it's too early for politics. I just think that we're not going to run an objectivist party and get anywhere with it. Now, that's my opinion. Do with it as you will, right? If somebody here is passionate about politics, if that's a thing that gets you going, you should do it. I mean, I'm not against people pursuing it. I just happen to think that it might be a little early. That doesn't mean we can't influence the political debate and shouldn't try. I think we should. I think it's one way in which we get our ideas across. It's one, we can find these wedge issues and come in on them. If we identified as the pro-trade, pro-immigration people, and then people start asking, how do you have these weird ideas? And then you can go into a more fundamental philosophical discussion. So you can use politics to go down, right, into philosophy. But actually running for office, the only way you could get elected was if you lied, right? And if you told the truth, nobody would elect you yet, right? Now that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be fun running and telling people the truth. It doesn't mean it wouldn't serve some marketing value and exposing people to the ideas. So I'm not against it. I wouldn't do it, although I do have an offer on the table. I don't know if you know this, but some people approached me to run for office in California. Well, they wanted me to run for president, but I said that's that's ridiculous on two dimensions. One is like losing a landslide, and two, I was born in Israel, so I don't have the fake birth certificate. Very bad. But in the spirit of Donald Trump. But I have said that I would be willing to run in California for either governor or the Senate if somebody came forward with $50 million to launch a campaign. So I'm not willing to try to raise that money initially because I think it's futile. I don't think anybody's going to give that kind of money for police. But if there's some billionaire out there says you're on, here's $50 million, go. I would have a blast. I would have so much fun. I mean, when I watch these debates right on television, I think of what I would say if I was on stage. I mean, it would be hysterical.
I cannot think of very many people better than that.
Yeah, so Yaron, now I realize that objectivism, libertarianism, not exactly the same thing at all, by a long shot. But here we've had an election where we've had the two most unpopular candidates in U.S. history, and the Libertarian Party has gone from 1% or something of the vote
to 3%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they had a pathetic candidate, if I can,
Do you think it's just the candidate, or do you think that people are not receptive to the message that they're...
Well, we don't know, because he never delivered the message. I mean, what did he say? He tried to go after Bernie Sanders voters. He kind of hummed and hawed about social spending or about entitlements. I mean, I've got a couple of, I was asked by the Wall Street Journal about this, and so there's some videos of me commenting on this online. But here was an amazing opportunity, right? People hated these two candidates, right? You're running for president with money behind you. They're real libertarians with real money supporting your campaign. You're not going to win. Forget it. You're not going to win. That's a given. Then educate people. Here's an opportunity to actually say interesting things. Right? Imagine if he had gone out there and said, Medicare's bankrupting the United States. It's socialized medicine for old people. We need to find ways to eliminate, phase out Medicaid. People would be horrified, but at least would they go, wow, I've never heard that before. Right? Or if he'd said the real problem is not taxes, all these Republicans always talk about taxes, the real problem is spending. Here's some major ideas to cut $500 billion off of next year's budget. And people would have paid attention at least. And then we would have known what's the vote for libertarians. But what did he say? I don't know. Does anybody know what Gary Johnson actually said? He doesn't know where Aleppo is. That we know. I mean, he didn't have an agenda that he articulated, and he had opportunities. He was interviewed by, he was interviewed by every single major newspaper. He had little debates. I mean, he actually had opportunities to talk. And people, for a while, listened because they were looking for an alternative. And I think a good candidate, I mean, I can't prove this, but I think a good candidate would have got 10 to 15%.
Ron Paul.
McAfee.
Ron Paul got 10% of the Republican vote in the primaries, an aggregate. Ron Paul did not do particularly well. And I don't think Ron Paul was a good candidate. I mean, I think people got excited about it. I've got in trouble with candidates every single election. Right? I literally hated, to this day, I despise George W. Bush, right? And I condemned George W. Bush from September 12th, 2001 on, right? Because I thought he was a wimp. I thought he gave tough guys a bad name. And people said, oh, you're ridiculous. And then people unfriended me on Facebook. And then when Ron Paul came about, I never liked Ron Paul. I don't know what, I thought he was inarticulate. He rambled. He had opportunities to say really, so end the Fed and replace it with what? No answer. So end the Fed was the one radical idea he had, but he never really articulated the case for individual rights. He never articulated the case for entitlement reform or phasing them out. He never articulated a case for really shrinking government, for eliminating massive regulations. And he was up on stage where tens of millions of people were listening. He could have done even more than he did. And it's interesting that when I speak to libertarians, Students for Liberty, which is a big student libertarian organization in the United States, and they say that that Students for Liberty was, in a sense, created because of all the buzz around Ron Paul. All these young people went for Ron Paul. And it's interesting, that you know who they voted for this election? Bernie Sanders. Because they were attracted to the libertarian idea out of emotion. Oh, legalize drugs. You know, that feels good. Anti-cronyism, that feels good. Again, details, what does that mean? What is the role of government? How do you really shrink government? Those are the kind of things that are controversial, that don't get you votes, but are the meaningful long term, and they are educational. And the primary responsibility of a libertarian candidate is not to win. You won't. The primary responsibility of a libertarian candidate is to educate. And Gary Johnson and most libertarian candidates have flopped completely. And to a large extent, because I believe that libertarians lack that philosophical foundation that allows them to stand up on stage and say, Social Security is an immoral pyramid scheme. It's immoral because it's redistributive. But to use that kind of language, you have to know what morality is.
Okay, it's 8:30. I'm going to carry on the Q&A, but I always like to give people a moment to get up and leave if they need to run for a train or something like that. So now's your time.
This is the advertised ad.
Staying. Awesome. Well, a question from the internet. More here, but question from the internet. What effect do you think Donald Trump will have on the world economy?
Well, who knows? I mean, I think the bottom line is we don't know. The markets seem to think it's positive, and maybe it will be. And I think that the end it depends on his position on trade. To the extent that he's serious about tariffs and penalizing companies who leave America and raising tariffs 35% or 45% on China or whatever those numbers are, that's devastating for the world economy. It's devastating for the American economy. That single thing could be much more important economically than tax cuts and even deregulation. Tariffs are a disaster, particularly in a globalized economy like we have today. You know, one of the great things about the world today is how globalized it is. How much global trade happens is one of the really beautiful things in the world today. And you know, again, one of the underreported stories, because nobody's going to say this because nobody has an incentive to, but close to 2 billion people have come out of poverty in the last 30 years in places like China and India and Taiwan and Thailand and all kinds of places, even beginning in Africa, right, where economies are adopting capitalism in a few places and where wealth is being created. I mean, that's an amazing story. 2 billion people, right? The world isn't falling apart economically from that perspective. And a lot of that is a consequence of global trade. A lot of that is because American companies build stuff overseas, and because they're contractors all over the world building our clothes. Most of our clothes are made in places like Bangladesh, where people are making a living. They've come out of poverty, right? Making us clothes. And we're better off because we're paying less money for the same clothes. So the win-win nature of trade, to me, the most shocking thing of this whole campaign was the attack on trade. And the fact that almost nobody defended it. Indeed, the best people defending trade were leftist economists, which blew my mind, right? People like Alan Blinder, who I don't agree with on anything. I've met the guy. Ugh, I hate him, right? But he wrote an excellent op-ed in the Wall Street Journal defending trade. I mean, this should be Econ 101. This is Adam Smith. This is The Wealth of Nations. This is why he wrote the book, to condemn mercantilism in the name of the benefits of trade. And yet, 240 years later, we want to be mercantilists. But because that's what Donald Trump is. Now, again, to some extent that already exists. He wants to put it on steroids and make it explicit. Because if you look at the TPP and NAFTA, these things, the main problem with them is that they're crony, right? These industries, we have X tariff, and these industries, we have Y tariffs, and these industries we ban completely. And now, generally, they lower tariffs, so they're good, generally. But they're completely distorted. The ideal trade deal is very simple. Lower tariffs, make them flat, the same for every single good, and make them as low as one could conceive of, ideally zero. But even if it wasn't zero, even if it was some other rate, the idea would be to make them uniform across all, not high on, on steel. In America, tariffs on steel from some countries are something like 400%. So it depends on what he does. If he goes after trade, that would be devastating for the global economy. But he is very likely to do some good things. He's likely to deregulate banking in the United States, which is good, at least in the short run, whether he does it right. The problem with deregulation is you do it wrong, you create short-term economic growth and a major bubble and implosion long-term. That's what happened with S&Ls. They were deregulated in a bad way. They created the S&L crisis. So you have to do it right. So this is why my vote for Treasury Secretary was John Allison, because John would have done it right. Because he understands that at the core of all banking regulation is deposit insurance. Unless you reform deposit insurance, ultimately privatize it, get rid of it, all the rest, it's hard to tinker with the rest without doing away with it.
And John Allison is BB&T Bank, so that's a bank leader.
Was a CEO of BB&T and was a CEO of Cato, of the Cato Institute, until about a year and a half ago, something like that.
Okay. There were no further questions from online. However, Kevin Burns wrote from online to say that he is starting an objectivist party in the UK.
Oh, just a political party in the UK.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's interesting.
Do you guys know Kevin?
Nope.
Okay.
He's on the live stream now.
Okay, good.
Should we be paying any attention to the alt-right, and should we be afraid?
Should we be paying any attention to the alt-right, and should we be afraid? I'm surprised they're not here.
I think there was one on the live stream.
Okay. Yes and yes. I definitely think the alt-right exists, and it is vicious. It is horrible. I can't think of all the negative words I could associate with it. I mean, it's basically racist. It's fundamentally racist. Racism is at the core of what the alt-right is about. It's not a phenomenon that was defined by the left. Or the alt-right is a term established by Richard Spencer. Not Robert Spencer, Richard Spencer. I got in trouble with Robert, who's a good guy, because I attributed to him. Richard Spencer and some other people who called the whole thing alt-right, and he called their views alt-right, and he's a racist, he's a white supremacist. I don't think it's, I think it's still small. I think it's at the margins, very vocal. But I think Steve Bannon, who is advising Donald Trump, he calls himself an economic nationalist. And he says, I'm not an ethno-nationalist. Even the terminology, my God, you would have to say, oh, and I'm not an ethno. I mean, why would you even have to say that, right? Where did this even come from, the idea of ethno-nationalist? But an economic nationalist is bad enough. And he tolerates the alt-right. Now, I know Milo's English, and you guys probably all love him. But he's nuts. I mean, the guy is nuts. And he is a nihilist. He likes to knock things down. He likes to break them. Now, yeah, he's breaking leftist stuff. So we all go, yeah. But what's he putting in their place? What is the alternative that Milo offers? Nothing. Nothing. Right? There's no values that Milo is promoting that are not in themselves horrific, because he's I don't know that he's part of the alt-right, but he's certainly an apologist for the alt-right. You know, he talks about these young people who send anti-Semitic memes and racist memes. He said, oh, they're just having fun. Right? Have you seen what they write? This is fun, and you wouldn't condemn this to the. I mean, I did my radio show on the alt-right a few weeks ago, and I've never seen the kind of tweets that I got from these people. I mean, I didn't think there was anybody in the world who thought these things anymore. But there they were, hundreds of them.
But should they be banned?
No, you can't ban them. But you got to pay attention to them, because they're vicious. They're bad guys. They think this is entertainment to say, Hitler should have finished the job, or to put swastikas over the White House, or but here's a funny one. This is hysterical. So I was in Exeter. A lot of you know I was in Exeter last time I was in the UK, which is just a month or two ago. And I was trying to give a talk on free speech at Exeter. And a group of Palestinian, they weren't even Palestinians, they were Palestinian supporters, most of them were Brits. A group of Palestinian supporters came and they wouldn't let me speak, right? And they yelled at me and they called me a racist and a fascist. And for half an hour I couldn't even speak until security came and they cleared us into another room, declared the event private and excluded them. And finally I could give my talk on free speech. Which was great because I didn't have to express why this was an issue. We just lived it. Anyway, on Twitter, these people who had attacked me went on Twitter and started calling me, a fascist and a racist. So one of these alt-right people, right? This is just worth having the alt-right just for this tweet. He comes. This is the tweet he says. He says, "I'm a racist, and let me tell you, Yaron Brook is no racist." I'm gonna have that framed. I mean, who admits to being a racist and would try? I mean, these people are nuts, right? I mean, this is so for objectivists or for libertarians to take this seriously or to find it entertaining or to say, oh well, not everybody's like that. If you're not like that, say I hate the alt-right. I'm not alt-right, but to say, yeah, there's some extremists in the alt-right, but I'm the more moderate wing of the racist alt-right. I mean, what is... It's nuts. These are bad ideas. And maybe, who knows, right? This is Twitter. So it could be 5 people with 100 accounts, right? It could be a tiny little movement out there and they use technology very well. They put these triple parentheses around Jewish names. They've got an app that automatically goes into Twitter and puts parentheses around Jewish names.
Why?
To identify you as a Jew and it's something about an echo chamber the Jews are within, right? Something like that. Anyway, it's like a yellow star, right? It's like they're trying to put a yellow star. It's just, and they think this is, again, people think this is funny and entertaining. And so I think, yes, maybe they're clever in a sense that they're using social media very effectively, and maybe Milo and people like that are very good at dismantling the left. But that's not what we should be about. We should be about positive values. We should be about what we have to offer to the world. It's easy to attack the left. And Coulter does it beautifully. Ask her to defend her position, she falls apart. But they can attack. They're attack dogs. That's not what we're about. And this is why we're about what is the positive vision. And we attack people who attack our positive vision, and why would you ever use, so they're leftists in the name of attacking the left, because that's what these things are.